WhatsApp. Так, у нас сколько сейчас человек? Сейчас подключится. Так, Луис здесь. Джармус здесь. Да, здесь. Понять не имею, кто это. Вот. Модератор здесь. Так. Алексей Батов опять попал. Джо был. Вот, Джо присоединился. Отлично. Так.
Да, Сон, спасибо.
Поприветствуйте наших уважаемых товарищей на открытии конференции «Диалог наций».
Hello, everyone. Mr. Alexander is here. He's greeting everyone. And welcome to the third International Conference, Dialogue of Nations. Can you hear us?
Yes.
If you can hear us, please reply.
Yes.
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 Great.
Yeah. Great.
Да, слышим.
Отлично. Соответственно, по мере у нас будут подключаться новые спикеры в течение там 10-15 минут. Значит, английский язык у нас будет языком сегодняшней конференции, поэтому коллеги могут спокойно читать свои доклады на английском языке и, соответственно, не ждать никакого синхронного перевода, как и поэтапного, как сейчас у нас.
So if someone is not connected yet, in the nearest 10-15 minutes, they'll come and join us. But basically today, the language of the conference is English. So please kindly, you can proceed with your speeches in English without waiting for any translation or synchronized translation. You can just carry on. When you have your word, you can speak in English.
И единственная просьба, так как я буду модерировать сегодняшнюю конференцию, попрошу выключать всех микрофоны, когда выступает какой-то из спикеров.
The only request, please, as I'm going to be the moderator of this conference, is to switch off the microphone during the speech of anyone who is speaking today. So that will help us to listen carefully what he or she is saying.
У нас есть чат, мы его будем мониторить. Если у кого-то будут возникать вопросы, либо нужно будет срочно выступить, пожалуйста, пишите в чат, мы его мониторим.
We are also having a chat room where you can write your questions, your requests. We are monitoring it, and during our conference, we are going to reply on all the questions there.
Также у меня есть список выступающих, где все наши коллеги перечислены, и, соответственно, я буду давать слово по этому списку.
Also, I have the list of all the speakers today, and I'm going to give the word to everyone one by one as per this prepared list.
Мы начинаем.
So let us start.
Я благодарю всех наших коллег, которые сегодня присоединились к нашей конференции в этот трудный для мира период.
I want to say thank you to all our colleagues who joined us today during this difficult time and not very easy time all over the world.
К сожалению, мы не смогли собраться в офлайн-конференции у наших близких друзей в Донецке для того, чтобы встретиться и провести обмен мнениями по очень важным глобальным вопросам.
Unfortunately, we are not able to meet offline in our friends' territory as we wanted in Donetsk, where we wanted to meet and discuss all the important issues and queries on all the global questions.
Я благодарю господина Алексея Муратова и его движение «Донецкая республика», самое крупное движение в Донецке, общественное, за то, что поддержали проект «Диалог наций» и предоставили площадку для того, чтобы в будущем мы смогли ежегодно собираться и обмениваться мнениями.
I want to say thank you to Mr. Alexei Muratov and to the public movement Donetsk Republic for this wonderful opportunity for us to gather in future every year in Donetsk for the support of the conference Dialogue of Nations. And I want to say thank you for that.
Сейчас мы, к сожалению, живем во времена коронавируса, и я хочу пожелать всем нашим участникам, их семьям, их соратникам, активистам быть здоровыми и беречь себя.
Sadly to say, but now we are living during the times of coronavirus all over the world, and I want to wish all our colleagues, our partners, to their families to stay healthy, to take care of themselves, and to pass these difficult times together.
К сожалению, несмотря на всеобщие проблемы, остается до сих пор открытым вопрос санкций, которые западные страны вводят против других своих оппонентов на Ближнем Востоке в отношении России. И несмотря на то, что весь мир должен объединяться, к сожалению, западный мир и президент Соединенных Штатов призывают нас все-таки к ограничениям.
Sadly to say, unfortunately, even though the situation in the world is only about regarding the coronavirus situation, but still the question of sanctions is open, and our Western partners still are pushing for sanctions against different countries, and even the president of the US is still openly saying about the restrictions and particular restrictions they want to implement even today.
Также я поддерживаю, наши организации поддерживают глобальное движение против санкций.
Our organizations support the global organizations against sanction.
Также по линии Международного комитета защиты прав человека мы дважды обратились в Государственный департамент США и лично к президенту Трампу с просьбой выпустить российских граждан из тюрем, которые отбывают наказание по надуманным обвинениям на территории Соединенных Штатов, и попросили отправить их на родину для того, чтобы их жизни не угрожала опасность. К сожалению, мы также не получили никакого ответа.
And we already requested twice. We applied to the Home Department of the USA to release all the prisoners who are Russian citizens, to release them due to the reason of coronavirus pandemic. But unfortunately, we didn't get any reply, any answer. We asked to release them and send them back home, but there was no answer as of such.
Но я уверен, что наша интернациональная активность будет только крепнуть, и в период этого вируса мы сможем еще глубже расширить наши отношения, и в частности по линии гуманитарного сотрудничества.
But I believe during this crisis, during the virus pandemic, our international activity will only strengthen, including the humanitarian side of our activity, and we will only develop it in the best way we can.
Мы передаем свою солидарность жителям Ближнего Востока, западной части нашего полушария, Латинской Америки, и говорим о том, что несмотря на все санкции, которые вводились Америкой, мы по линии гражданского общества продолжаем активно помогать гуманитарной помощью странам Европы. И лично наша организация приняла участие в гуманитарной помощи в Италию и на Ближний Восток, в Исламскую Республику Иран.
We want to pass our solidarity to the Middle East countries, to the Western Hemisphere countries, including Latin America. And we want to say that despite the current difficult situation in the world, we keep passing and we keep providing humanitarian aid to different countries. Our organization is helping countries, including the European countries, such as Italy, and we are planning to do so in future.
Я еще раз передаю солидарность всем нашим организациям, которые сегодня участвуют в нашей конференции и постоянно помогают нам проводить политическую и гуманитарную активность. И перехожу к следующему выступающему хочу, чтобы господин Алексей Муратов взял слово.
Once again, I want to pass our solidarity from our organization to all the organizations, the representatives of which are here today. And thank you for being here. And I want to pass the word to Mr. Alexei Muratov to give his greeting speech to everyone.
Приветствую, уважаемые друзья, коллеги, соратники. Не стали мы откладывать в долгий ящик нашу встречу, которая была запланирована. Да, внесены были коррективы с учетом сегодняшней угрозы коронавируса. Мы ее проводим в таком режиме онлайн через видеоконференцию. Но я уверен, что закончится вся эта история с коронавирусом, все эти карантины и границы будут открыты, и мы с вами встретимся на гостеприимной земле Донбасса. Здесь, в Донецке, проведем полноценно конференцию, как мы и планировали.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, dear friends, partners, comrades. I want to say hi to you and that thank you for being here. We decided not to postpone our meeting as we planned, as it was told before that we will meet in Donetsk, but due to the coronavirus threat, it is unfortunately not possible, but we are still having it today in such online video mode, but hope in the nearest future already we will be able to gather in Donetsk, and we will be happy to meet you all here in our beautiful land of Donbass.
Сегодня Донецкая Народная Республика – это определенная территория возможностей, своеобразный остров свободы в центре Европы. Сегодня люди сделали свой выбор, проголосовав на референдуме за создание Донецкой Народной Республики, за интеграцию в Российскую Федерацию. И мне кажется, сегодня мы на примере Донецкой Народной Республики показываем уникальный вот этот инструмент народовластия, когда простые люди, граждане выстраивают государственные институты, выстраивают республику по принципам самоуправления. И сегодня в свете тех событий, которые происходят в мире, когда существующие глобальные системы управления, мировая экономика, мировая финансовая система показывают свою неэффективность и заходит в тупик, будет, наверное, актуально поднять эти вопросы именно здесь, на территории Донецкой Народной Республики, которая может быть определенной экспериментальной площадкой для использования новых инновационных технологий, в сфере экономики, и бизнеса, и финансов, и отношений между людьми.
Today, the Donetsk People's Republic is the land of opportunities. And when people voted, they went for the referendum to vote to be an independent country 6 years back. That became the real country, the country of real people's governance, where people choose to become independent, where people want to build the self-governance on the principles of humanity. And as you know, in the world nowadays, unfortunately, the world is not fair. We are here trying to build the country. The people are trying to build the country by themselves. And the Donetsk People's Republic is a country where you can actually build your own future indeed. And we are all happy to invite you here and to share our experience, to discuss the situation in the world. And we are open to any discussion and conversation on anti-globalist movements.
Сегодня мировая экономика, основана на рыночных принципах, заходит в тупик. И необходимо, мне кажется, сегодня поднимать вопрос об определении цели, куда же все-таки мир и человечество движется. Необходимо поставить цель, допустим, развития человека и общества, и под это выстраивать экономику. Сегодняшняя рыночная экономика не способна к целеполаганию. Она направлена на максимальное извлечение прибыли. И вот в погоне за этой прибылью мы нещадно уничтожаем экологию, мы нерационально используем те ресурсы, которые сегодня есть на нашей планете. Довольно-таки известное выражение Махатма Ганди: мир слишком большой, чтобы удовлетворить потребности всех людей, живущих на Земле, но он слишком мал, чтобы удовлетворить человеческую жадность. И сегодня на территории Донецкой Народной Республики в рамках нашего сотрудничества с антиглобалистами Российской Федерации и по всему миру мы предлагаем создать вот эту площадку дискуссионную, экспертную, для того, чтобы поднимать те проблемы, те вопросы, которые сегодня накопились и стоят перед человечеством.
We believe that today's economy, today's global economy is not the one which is going to lead us to anything. We have to see what is the priority, to gain profits or to put human life and human society on as a priority. We are trying to create something different from the economy, which is unfortunately is in the most of the so-called developed countries nowadays. Here in Donetsk People's Republic, we are offering to build the experimental platform where all of us, all the movements, all the organizations of anti-globalists can say their word, can offer the ideas, and we are ready to implement here together as an alternative to what has been happening to the world till now. And as all of you know, Mahatma Gandhi said, the world is enough for all people to be there, but unfortunately it's too small for the human's greediness. So we are offering the alternative. We are here to listen to the ideas, to discuss these ideas and to implement them in future together.
Ну и в заключение хотелось бы сказать, да, конечно, сегодня в 21 веке странно, что люди до сих пор продолжают вести войны. И сегодня мы, как никто, знаем всю горечь и боль, которую приносят вооруженные конфликты. Мы выступаем против войны здесь, на Донбассе, против войн в мире. Мне кажется, вот сегодня перед угрозой коронавируса, глобальной угрозой, с которой столкнулся весь мир, необходимо прекратить и войны, прекратить все вооруженные конфликты, необходимо садиться за стол переговоров, необходимо снимать экономические блокады, потому что мы сегодня понимаем, что экономическая блокада против простых жителей Донбасса – это, по сути, экономический геноцид со стороны стран Запада. И сегодня в таких условиях находится не только Донецкая Народная Республика, но и многие другие страны, и Сирия, и Иран. И сегодня необходимо снимать эти санкции, необходимо садиться за стол переговоров. И наше сообщество, мне кажется, вот будет таким локомотивом и примером для всего мира. На этом спасибо за внимание. И передаю слово Александру.
And to sum it up, I want to say that for me personally, it is strange that in the 21st century, we still have wars, we have armed conflicts all over the globe. And the example of it is the Donetsk People's Republic, where we suffered, the people of the country suffered from the war. And we believe that we need to stop any war, especially when we have such threat as coronavirus nowadays. We need to stop wars, armed conflicts. We need to sit and talk. People all, not only here, but in other places, are suffering from these politics. And we believe that by uniting together and coming up with some solutions which we can openly announce and say against the current economy and against the current global system, we can actually achieve something, and we want to achieve something, and that's why we are here today. Thank you for listening to me, and I pass the word to Mr. Alexander.
Большое спасибо, Алексей. The next speaker, Joe Lombardo, United Nations Anti-War Coalition. After Joe, the speaker, Sarah Fernandez. Please. Joe, go ahead.
Mute here. First of all, I'd like to apologize for not being able to speak to you today in Russian. I can only speak in English. That was a last-minute add to the agenda. So I'm going to speak a little bit off the top of my head, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the situation that's going on right now in the United States, especially during this period of the coronavirus. The coronavirus has basically exposed the problems of the just-in-time capitalist system that exists in the United States, meaning that they only make what they need immediately so they could sell and make the most profit off of anything. And our medical system, of course, is a privatized medical system. Millions of people are not covered by our medical insurance and don't have any health care at all. And they are suffering during this period. By just-in-time capitalism, I mean, we were totally unprepared. We did not have the number of masks and ventilators and other material that is needed to fight the virus in the United States. And there's been a continual battle between the federal government and the local governments all around the country, because the federal government for a long time denied denied the existence of the virus as it was hitting hard many states, including my own, which is New York State, which has been the center of the virus in the United States. And today in the United States, we have the highest number of infections of any country in the world and the highest number of deaths. And unfortunately, I believe that we've only seen the tip of the iceberg in the United States. It's mainly hit the areas on the coasts and will work its way into the interior of the country, where there's been less preparation, where governors have, in some cases, refused to recognize that even the virus exists or is a serious threat, and have not done the kinds of precautions that are necessary to ensure that that people will not get affected. The other thing that we're seeing, so for instance, we have less beds per capita, less hospital beds per capita than Italy. And then many other countries around the world, and we're not doing as well as some very poor countries in terms of containing the virus in the United States. But one of the things that's happening during this virus is the federal government is using it as an excuse to pass rules and regulations that they've been wanting to pass but felt they couldn't. And they're using the cover of the virus itself to do this. So for instance, the Trump administration has announced that no company has to follow environmental guidelines right now. They could dump whatever they want into the rivers. They can do whatever they want. This is very significant because this pandemic has been a shock to the American people. We've heard of pandemics in other parts of the world, but they never hit us. So we never took it seriously. We've never took global warming seriously. And one of the things that people have said that have seen global warming and studied global warming around the world is that it will release new kinds of viruses as forests are chopped down, people come in more contact with wild animals, and viruses will jump from wild animals to people. That viruses will be uncovered as the ice caps melt that have been covered up for millennia, and that we don't have immunity to. And we can see more situations like this. So I think this is waking up some of the American people, and I think that's very important and very significant. And we in the movement in the United States are discussing how we can take care of that. But on the international level, the United States has pushed ahead with its aggressive policies everywhere it can. There were supposed to be military maneuvers that were going to take place right on the Russian border with European and NATO powers. But one by one, the European countries, Germany and others, said, well, we're not going to participate in that during this virus. It's not, the military is not and something where we can protect our own citizens by doing this. And they withdrew, and they had to cut back on that. But the United States wanted to continue. There's a famous case here where one Navy vessel found that many people on it were contaminated with the virus. And the captain of that vessel wrote to his higher ups, and it got out to the media saying, we need to protect the sailors on this boat. And for that, he was fired from his position. Now he might be returned because there's been a big pushback against that. Part of the pushback was that the soldiers, the sailors on his boat, when he had to leave the boat and came off, gave him a big applause and thanked him for what they did. And this is very significant because those of us that fought against the war in Vietnam saw how the anti-war sentiment got down to the soldiers in the war in Vietnam, and they refused to fight. They stopped being a fighting force in Vietnam. And to see this kind of dissent going on in the military of the United States is heartening for the very same reasons. During this pandemic, where the soldiers are not being protected and prisoners are not being protected, there's a consciousness change that's happening. And perhaps they are going to say, we don't want to do these maneuvers in these wars. However, the United States has continued with military maneuvers in the South China Sea and Navy maneuvers around Hawaii that's being protested by the Hawaiian people. There's a huge petition that has been put out by people in Hawaii that's being signed by thousands and thousands of people to stop these military maneuvers during this period. The United States has also attacked Venezuela during this period. They accused Maduro of running drugs, which is crazy. And by the way, as with the other 39 countries that the US has under sanctions, we are denying medical equipment and medicine to Venezuela during this pandemic. However, the Venezuelans are doing better during this pandemic than any of the other countries in Latin America. It's because there's a social consciousness in Venezuela. The people understand and they think socially. They don't think individually as we learn to do in this country. They think of what is good for the society as a whole. When I was in Venezuela, that was demonstrated to me. That was shown by many, many people. You know, when we talked to the people that supported the revolution and supported the process going on in Venezuela, they all talked about how good it was for the entire population, that homeless people were given homes, that people that didn't have food were given food. When we spoke to the opposition, they all talked about how bad it was for them personally. There's no opportunity. They would like to go to the United States where there was the land of opportunity. It's a different way of thinking. And that way of thinking, that social consciousness, is what's leading Venezuela without the medicine and without the ventilators to do better than other countries in Latin America. You may have read also, although it wasn't covered very much in the United States, that a few days ago, a US vessel, a military vessel, off the shore of Iran, confronted some small military boats from Iran, and there was a dangerous confrontation that took place. The United States was being aggressive again towards Iran. Again, it reminds me of Vietnam, when we had boat in the military ship in the Gulf of Tonkin, and we claimed that it was fired on by the Vietnamese. Now it's turned out that that never happened. That was a lie. The US government lies often to its people because it does not want them to know what it did. But this reminds me of that in another Gulf off of Iran. During this period, they are trying to use military aggression against Iran. And also, you probably know, during this period, the United States upped the sanctions against Iran, which was one of the countries most hard hit by this virus. But the good thing is that many of the European countries that support and that are allies of the United States broke with the United States over this and have sent, broke the sanctions and have sent medical aid and other kinds of aid to Iran. So this virus might be something that causes this imperialist coalition to split, that causes some dissent within the military, that causes more dissent within the American population as people's consciousness are rising. And we are seeing this. We're seeing this a lot with some of the campaigns we're doing online, where we're getting much better and much bigger reception than we have in the past. So there's a number of Americans on this call, and our task is, when we come out of this isolation, we have to work together to figure how to organize that sentiment, to get out there and build a power in this country that can oppose this imperialist government, eventually replace it, because me as an anti-war activist, I know very well we will never end war under this capitalist imperialist system. It must be replaced with one which puts human needs ahead of profits. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Joe. This is a very great speech. And where's the Sarah? You hear me, Sarah?
Yes, greetings, hello.
Go ahead. Thank you. And don't forget to switch on your microphone and start your speech. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Let me also ask, do I need to pause for translation at all, or should I just proceed?
No. Speak in English, please.
All right. Well, first, thank you to today's conference organizers for proceeding and finding new ways and new links. And this is what we're doing on a world scale. A conference is canceled, and yet the conference continues in a new form. And it's communication and connection that is continuing. I want to especially extend greetings to the comrades in Donetsk, who have shown through years of resistance, steadfast resistance, that it is possible to stand up to the might of NATO. That's not a small accomplishment. So very, very important today, and it's a kind of example of resistance we need to show all over the world. Now, this pandemic confirms a desperate need for global cooperation on a new and higher level. It's the only way. It's a virus that does not respect boundaries, nationalities, and yet we find the opposite happening. So our role really is to build and give an example of the communication and the cooperation, and to demand new levels of cooperation, new levels of accessible healthcare for all. And this means globally. We don't have it here in the US, but it's something every country should have and is consciously denied through US sanctions and militarism and war. It's meant to break down cooperation and extract the highest level of profit and reinforce the most vicious class divisions. So this is a moment, a radical break in consciousness too, a radical break in our conduct. The world will not be the same after this pandemic. And I think that we should be acutely aware of. It won't be the same because it comes hand in hand with a global capitalist economic crisis, a complete crisis of the system. So it's not just that industries are shut down because of the need for social distancing. Wall Street had an absolute collapse, and that is not so quickly repaired. Everything now, the focus is on the pandemic, understandably, and it is what forces a complete change and isolation. But we have to know that the world won't come back together in the same way. And the US empire, its absolute weakness and its fracturing is more exposed than ever. Now, this virus strikes, as all diseases do, the harshest at the youngest, the oldest, the most vulnerable. We need to recognize it also strikes the harshest, and we can see this here in the US, at the Black and Latino communities, where the casualty rates are double. Those who didn't have any kind of health care before now are in complete crisis. The city hospitals are so far overstretched that there's refrigeration trucks for the bodies outside. I'm speaking to you from New York City, where the fatality rate far exceeds that of all of China. Now, how shameful, how absolutely outrageous is that, when there was months of warnings and yet no preparation, because there's not one hospital, not one agency in the country that can even order supplies in advance because it's not profitable. And every one of them operates on a for-profit basis. They're facing a far greater crisis in the period ahead because the source of profit in every hospital and every medical clinic is elective surgery, and that's been discontinued. So we face an extraordinary, it's amazing, layoffs of medical workers, and they're cutting pay by 20 up to 70%. The healthcare workers in almost every hospital are being laid off and then rehired on a contract basis without benefits. Now, this is quite incredible, and yet it's happening in hospital and clinics all around the country. By June, the layoffs of medical workers will be more than 1 million in the US. You think, how could this even be? And yet this is the way a for-profit system operates, that it can only, every institution, if there's no money, it's payroll that's cut, despite the need. So this is the insanity of the capitalist system, the insanity of a higher death rate, as I say, in the US. We can't get away from it. It's hitting New York extraordinarily high right now, but it will echo out because the preparations in the rest of the country aren't much better. So we're feeling it now acutely here. The most dangerous place is to go to a hospital. Those that they pick up dead bodies at home are 8 times higher than ever before. There's also people they're picking up on the streets. And overwhelmingly in the US today, the deaths in nursing homes are not counted, aren't even measured. So these are the kind of crises that we face. And in the midst of it, what is the US response? It is to, on a global scale, intensify sanctions and militarism and environmental destruction. It is amazing, and it is what will create a complete rupture in consciousness, in my opinion, and why we need to prepare in entirely new and different ways. Just let me address sanctions, because we're very much continuing the campaign of the Sanctions Kill campaign. Sanctions against 39 countries, 1/3 of the population of the world. And these sanctions are intensifying. And the threats, US Navy off the coast of Venezuela, insisting that they're going to enforce a blockade, while they make charges of drugs against President Maduro, the legally elected president. So we see this continuing all over the world, intensified sanctions. Half of the sanctioned countries are in Africa, where there should be the greatest solidarity, because there's hundreds of years of looting, of colonialism, and even today. And yet, what's the US response? US Wall Street response, US corporate response is sanctions on one country after another in Africa. Consider what has been done to Zimbabwe, to absolutely destroy and pull down and try to pull apart the country. Some of the sanctioned countries, even if you ask the names, why sanctions from Mali to Guinea-Bissau? Why sanctions on Laos? Why sanctions on countries all around the world, in Asia and in Africa, that we can't even understand what crime they committed? The US threatened sanctions on countries at the World Health Organization. They threatened to sanction Ecuador for introducing a resolution on the importance of women breastfeeding children. Now that seemed to impact some agribusiness and corporate power. And the threat was on Ecuador, if they introduced this resolution just on women breastfeeding and talking about the importance that was for infant health, that they would sanction Ecuador. And that made every country fearful of introducing this resolution. It's to the credit of Russia that they said, we're already sanctioned, we'll introduce a resolution. I mean, this is just to have a resolution passed through the World Health Organization in a meeting in Geneva. It shows that countries are sanctioned for crimes they can't even imagine that they've committed, and yet they're then starved down, blocked from being able to trade and purchase on an international scale. So we need global attention on the sanctions and on the continuing role of US bases around the world, more than 800 bases. And many of these bases are actually vectors for the virus because people live in great concentrations. There's no provisions made for the surrounding people except occupation. So, so important to address NATO, US military bases. This is a time when there are real cracks coming within NATO and within the European Union as countries compete with each other for very scarce resources and actually steal from each other resources like respirators and ventilators. It's quite amazing to see this going on, and yet it's happening not only in the US, but throughout the other imperialist countries of the world. They've made no provisions, and yet they then in a rush want to act like they're protecting their own people at the expense of others. So this is why solidarity is the most important people's weapon. It has always been in every single form: political solidarity, economic solidarity, cooperation among people, putting that forward as the only way to fight a virus and to fight a capitalist economic crisis. And I do think the literal inability of this system to find the most fundamental solutions will create a new awareness. So I thank you for this dialogue, this opportunity. And I say, let's have more of this because it is a vital need. You know, the more you isolate people, they start busily building threads to each other in new ways. And that is what these connections, these online connections have become. They start exchanging ideas right away and breaking this down. So I think this is an important expression, and thank you for today. Let's continue it. Let's continue to demand health care for all, distribute the massive surpluses of food. We have food lines in the US that stretch miles long. That's not an exaggeration, because people cannot eat and they're desperate for food from food pantries. We need health care for all, and we need an end to sanctions, an end to militarism, an end to war. And that really is a fundamental challenge to capitalism, an end to private expropriation of the wealth of this planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This is a great speech. Now, the next speaker, the Omali Yeshetela, Hand of International Uhuru Movement. Go ahead, Comrade Omali.
Uhuru is Swahili for freedom. And it is a slogan, greeting, demand by our movement and by the African Socialist International that I chair. The African Socialist International is an international organization of African people stretched across the globe. We function concretely, actively on the continent of Africa, and especially in what is called South Africa. We're in the Caribbean, we're in Europe, we're in the United States. And I want to mention, starting from the start, that because I'm in the United States, it's absolutely necessary for me to express total, unambiguous solidarity with the people and the government of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. That it is absolutely necessary to do that. And also, I am the chair of the African Socialist International. In the United States, we are the African People's Socialist Party. In the Caribbean, in Bahamas, for example, we are the Bahamian African People's Socialist Party. And the same thing is true in the various places we are located. I think it's important to say that this struggle that we're involved in did not begin with a virus. In fact, some 300,000 African people were killed in an earthquake in Haiti in 2009, 2010, that did not get much attention from the world in the same fashion, although the Red Cross and the foundation of William Jefferson Clinton, then the United States president, collected billions of dollars that they kept for themselves and did nothing for African people on the continent of Haiti. The fact is, they talk about how Africans in the United States are so vulnerable to infection by this virus because they say that the other kinds of health issues that afflict our community, the joblessness and other things like that. We call this a colonial virus because there are these kinds of discrepancies in how Africans and especially people in the United States, white people in the United States are affected by this virus clearly demonstrates that what we are looking at, is a political issue. It's a political question, the question of who has the power. And the African people at large do not have the power. And this is a power that has been taken from us and been expropriated for hundreds of years. For 600 years ago, when Portugal at first attacked Africa and began the process of kidnapping, exporting Africans to various parts of the world, is the basis for what we see in terms of the conditions of existence of Black people everywhere. And of course, that is true in the United States in terms of these horrible conditions where in places like in Louisiana, for example, where 71% or so of the people who are afflicted by this virus are Africans. And up until 2 days ago, 100% of the people who were killed by the virus in St. Louis were Africans. At the same time, African people are being dispossessed from our homes, our communities. This was before anything like a virus. It's like war is always being made against African people because we are colonized. And I'm here today in this conference because I think it's extremely important that we have to win unity with a new definition of the conditions of African people, the struggle of African people in the world, and it's not against racism. We do not suffer because white people don't like us. We suffer because we have no power over our lives, and the struggle has to be to take power. And every place we are organizing, the objective is to become a self-governing, self-empowered people. This is what we call on everybody in the world to recognize that we have a responsibility to do. In the United States, there are more than 2 million people in prison in this country. There are more Africans in prison in the United States than there are people in Djibouti in East Africa, or there are people in Equatorial Guinea, or there are people in Southwest Africa. There are more Africans in prison. And this is a fundamental crisis. It's a crisis that existed before COVID-19. The crisis has been the African people have been enslaved and not having control of our lives. And the struggle that we've been engaged in for a long time is to win back that control. 1884 and 85, Europeans sat at a table in Berlin, Germany, and carved up Africa into the untenable entities that we see today that are often called countries and illogically called nations. And what this has done, among other things, is create the conditions for easier expropriation of all the value on the continent of Africa. It has enriched Europe. It has enriched America, and the capitalist system that many of us hate so much actually sits on a pedestal of the oppression and enslavement of Africa and the colonization of the peoples of the world. If there is, and there obviously is, a situation we're living in today of perpetual warfare, where the United States, it parades itself around the world as being this example of democratic rights and democracy and what have you. It is only able to do that because leftists inside the United States do not condemn on a regular basis the United States for what it does to Black people, to Africans in the United States. It couldn't go around. If the world was aware and in solidarity with the struggle of African people to win back our freedom and power over our own lives, it would be impossible for the United States to do that. That's our responsibility. In a country with the largest prison population in the world, with half of which being Africans, a huge sector being Mexicans and other indigenous peoples in this country, clearly the colonial question is alive and well. And colonialism dominates our reality and dominates the reality of much of the world. And the economic system that we talk about, that we deplore so much, capitalism, rests upon a foundation of the enslavement of African people, of the colonization of peoples around the world. This is what we are contending with, and this is what we have to recognize. We are calling on people to recognize, for example, in Boston, I mentioned St. Louis. I could say the same thing about Michigan, and the numbers, the disparity in the amount of people being afflicted by what they call COVID-19, which is the colonial virus. But you look at in Boston as an example, where the average wealth held by white people in Boston is $247,500. The average income, the median income for Africans in Boston is $8. That's a statement of the colonial conditions that African people experience, even though we live on the same territory, the same physical territory as white people do. And the task that we have before us is to force the world to recognize we need solidarity, not to get white people to like us, but be able to win our freedom so that whether white people like us or not, they cannot hurt us because we have power over our own lives. That's what we're asking for. That's why we're here. When we say self-determination, we mean that in a very serious way. This is why this is such an important conference for us. We demand the ability to be able, a self-governing people, and we recognize it is our responsibility to do it ourselves. But we unite and are in solidarity with all the oppressed peoples in the world who are fighting against imperialism. We are opposed to the coup that was initiated by the US government that is responsible for even the discussion about Donetsk. There was a coup there that was initiated by the United States. And we recognize that. And people, we saw the same attempt being made to do a coup in Syria, the same attempt being made to do a coup in Iran, the same attempt being made to do a coup in various other places in the world. And these things they call sanctions are acts of war. And they are able to do this because they have control of the world economy. That world economy rests upon a foundation of colonialism, and it's our responsibility to destroy colonialism. That's my job. And so in discussing this with you, I'm asking for solidarity with the aspirations of Black people to be self-determining people. My job is to fight for the total liberation and unification of Africa. Every 12,000 square miles of Africa, 12 million square miles of Africa, and African people around the world. And I'm headquartered in the United States, but I'm clear. I am not an American. In fact, I am not one of those people who claim that we came to America looking for a better way of life. The reality is that Black people didn't come to America looking for a better way of life. We lost a better way of life as a consequence of being brought here at gunpoint. Secondly, this whole concept of America being a nation of immigrants is nonsense. America is not even a nation. It's a settler state, and it is a prison of nations. It is a settler state in the same way Israel is a settler state. It's a settler state in the same way we've seen settler states in places like South Africa under apartheid, etc. And those of us who have been oppressed and exploited here, the indigenous people, how many indigenous people? They don't even recognize or talk about the indigenous people who live in concentration camps that they call Indian reservations. We say free all political prisoners. All the African political prisoners, the United States is able to preen as being honest for democracy because nobody talk about where the real gulag is. The real gulag is in the United States with 2 million people, more people in prison in the United States than there are in China with more than 1 billion people. Free all of the political prisoners. Free all of those African people who are locked and pushed into these prisons because of circumstances that we have no control of. Reparations. We ask that people unite with the demand by African people here and around the world for reparations. We say, demand that the United States, AFRICOM, leave Africa, this organization, military organization placed on the continent of Africa for the exact purpose of continuing the domination of Africa and all of our resources. They have to go, and all foreign troops have to be pushed out of Africa, and this is what needs to be done in terms of solidarity with the struggle of African people to be self-determining. And I just want to thank you, and it's good to see you again, Comrade Sasha, and all of the other comrades whom we've enjoyed such a great relationship with in Russia. Uhuru.
Uhuru, Uhuru, Marie, thank you so much. And this is a very emotional speech, and we love your work, we love your organization, and I think the next time we're doing something good. And the next speaker now is Luis Marinelli, the Yes California movement.
Thank you, Alexander. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. To begin, I would like to start by delivering some remarks prepared for this conference by the leader of the California Independence Campaign, who's now Marcus Ruiz Evans, the partner with whom I co-founded this campaign back in 2014. He asked for me to speak on his behalf before I deliver my own comments afterwards. So he says, thank you to the people of Donetsk for organizing and inviting this California Independence Campaign to participate in the conference. We are honored to have the opportunity to develop a relationship with you and with the others you have assembled at this conference. One day, future independent nations such as California, Texas, Scotland, Quebec, Catalonia, and the people of Donetsk, and people from across Europe and the Middle East will exercise the right to self-determination, and we look forward to working with them at that time. So thank you again for hosting this conference. California is a nation state. It is a separate nation. Even though politically and legally we are still married to the United States, in California we already consider ourselves a separate country, a separate nation. And that's what our governor meant when he said that California is a separate nation. He meant that our nation, our state of California is a separate nation because that is our state of mind. And we already act like a separate nation. There are so many things that California does that more closely resemble the behavior of a country than that of an American state. One of such things I wanted to bring to your attention, since it directly relates to this conference and to why I support California's participation in it is that in this 2014, the state of California recognized the independence of Artsakh in the Republic of Nagorno-Karabakh. This historic vote specifically voiced encouragement for Artsakh's continuing efforts to develop a free and independent nation, and formally called upon the United States government to support the self-determination and democratic independence of the Nagorno-Karabakh Republic. The point is that California does these kinds of things. It behaves like a nation more than it behaves like a state in the United States, because it is a nation. And our campaign for independence is working to achieve that goal for ourselves. And in time, we hope to be in a position to recognize other nations in this world by encouraging and supporting the right of self-determination and independence today. So thank you. Now I'd like to turn my attention to my colleague and friend, which will be me, who now will continue with my own remarks for our conference. And I would also like to point out that I'm looking forward to, once this global health pandemic subsides, that we will have the chance to meet in person in the Donetsk People's Republic. So thank you for having me today. I appreciate the opportunity to once again meet with some of you. I've seen some familiar faces from our last conference that we held in Moscow a number of years back. And like I said, I look forward to seeing you and meeting new faces in Donetsk once the pandemic subsides. Now, California governors have long called California a nation state, or as in the case of California's previous governor, an outright separate nation. This is not only because our state has its own history and culture independent of American history and culture, but it is also because of California's economic might. At the moment, you may know that California's GDP is the 5th largest in the world. I believe it's larger than the GDP of the United Kingdom at this point in time. This, of course, is against the backdrop of our pandemic. In the United States, the federal government has generally governed the country during this crisis poorly, largely leaving the individual states, such as California, to face the pandemic themselves. In other words, the pandemic has made two things abundantly clear to us. First, we cannot rely on the American government during a non-military crisis. And second, California has proven capable of independent crisis management. So it is of no surprise that earlier this month, on more than one occasion, our current governor, Gavin Newsom, began referring to California as a nation state. Meanwhile, relations between the federal government and the individual state governments have become hostile and aggressive, in the words of New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo. He described the relationship between the states and the federal government as growing hostile and aggressive. When the American president announced that there was a possibility of a federal quarantine to take place in that state, the New York governor's response was that that would be a federal declaration of war against the states. So far, the American president has departed from those plans, but this week he also said and claimed that the American president has absolute power and that the states cannot do anything without his permission. And now in America, in the United States, there is a discussion going on that our country is supposed to have a president and not a king, and that the United States is based on the principles of shared powers between the states and the federal government. Now the individual states have begun defending their positions as the local governing authorities, and some have even announced their intentions to ignore orders from the federal government altogether, instead making decisions themselves. I point to one particular example, and that is of California, which recently signed a pact with its neighboring states in the north, Oregon and Washington. And they called this pact the Western States Pact. And the purpose of this pact is for California and Oregon and Washington to work together to decide in which ways they will reopen their economies and reopen their states and walk themselves out of this economic crisis and the pandemic. And to specifically decide for themselves in which way to do that and ignore federal orders and order federal guidelines for doing so. And so this Western States Pact between Oregon and California and Washington is an example of how the states in the United States are kind of working on a state level and ignoring federal powers. Meanwhile, a similar pact between 7 of the states in the northeastern United States has also been created with the intention of making decisions in the best way that's possible, the best way possible for their local region. And the result is in America now talk again of something that I haven't heard of since the time that I was in school, and that would be the Articles of Confederation. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, the Articles of Confederation is the system of government that the United States had prior to its current constitution. And under the Articles of Confederation, which only lasted about 10 years, the individual American states were more similar to what we have today in the European Union as opposed to in the United States, where each of the states were much more independent of the federal government. And so there seems to be some kind of discussion that maybe it's better for the United States to move in that direction, where the states retake a lot more of their independence from the federal government, as it was originally designed to be so, I might add. And that is why, in part, we see more growing interest in California for self-government and, by extension, independence at the same time and at the right time. Because at the right time means that this year, California, through our campaign, will submit paperwork once again to start collecting signatures in support of the new California independence referendum. In California, as you may or may not know, we have the right to referendum, and it is a constitutional protected right for the people of California. All that is required is that we collect enough signatures. And once we collect enough signatures, we will have a vote on independence in California. And we will begin that process this summer, and we intend to begin collecting signatures after the re-election of Donald Trump. I know it may be unpopular to say so, but we believe in our campaign that Donald Trump will be re-elected. That is not necessarily an endorsement of his re-election, just a simple reality of the facts, and we believe that he will be re-elected. And as a result, the people of California will rise up in support of independence at levels that nobody has ever seen before. And so therefore, since our campaign and many in California predict that Donald Trump will win his election again in November, our signature collection process will begin the day after his presidential election in November. It is precisely then that many in California will be in the mood to secede from the United States. It is precisely then that millions of Californians will be looking for some avenue to direct their anger and frustration. And our campaign intends to provide that avenue. Now, recently, our leader, Ruiz Evans, addressed the people of Iran and promised that the country of California in the future will have different foreign policies that the United States has. And therefore that there will be an opportunity for a dialogue between the people of California and the people of Iran. But that does not mean that the country of California will turn a blind eye to the human and civil rights violations that take place in Iran, or allow Iran to use the Republic of California as a staging point to inflict harm upon our brothers and sisters in America. Instead, it means that, unlike America, Californians will maintain an open dialogue, even with those peoples and nations with whom we disagree. Mr. Evans' appeal to the people of Iran attracted the attention of the national media. But in California, we did not see a backlash, because our people in California support the maintenance of peace and dialogue between nations, which is why California is happy to participate in this conference, this Dialogue of Nations conference, for the second time. The first time, as I mentioned before, took place in Moscow. This time, it was supposed to take place in Donetsk. But as we know, due to the pandemic, we are convening here today over the internet. But we will be more than happy to send a representative of the Independent Republic of California to Donetsk, not only to participate in the future conference, but also to open there an embassy of the Independent Republic of California, just as we did here in Moscow in 2016. Likewise, at the moment, after the appeal of our leader to the people of Iran, there is an open invitation to open a third of such embassies in the capital of Iran. Only the pandemic is standing in our way. Our campaign, in closing, has always said this point, and it's very important because it explains why our campaign is active on the international level. Our path to independence goes along three roads at the same time. First, our campaign works in California to convince the people that they should vote yes for independence, as any traditional political campaign might undertake. Second, due to the constitutional regulations regarding secession of states in America, we need the consent of Americans in some form or another. And therefore, the campaign works at the national level in the United States to gain the support of the American people. But third, at the international level, we are working to familiarize the world with the idea that California can become an independent country, and that when that time comes, we will need and require their recognition on the world stage. And so that is why we are happy to participate in this conference today, and we are happy to participate when it convenes in the Donetsk Republic, and I thank you for your time.
Excuse me, I want to protest the participation of this racist white nationalist organization in this dialogue today. There is absolutely no room for an organization that is connected to the states' rights movements in the US today in participating in a dialogue on solidarity. Not one mention of racism in the US, not one mention in California of the migrant population. And independence by this organization really means a program of racism. There is absolutely no participation. If we're going to talk about dialogue, if we're going to talk about solidarity of people, it's not with the participation of groups. This isn't about independence. This is about white nationalism, and it has no role in this dialogue. And I encourage others on this forum right now to speak up and draw the line on dialogue. So let's hear from some others.
Well, I would like to ask you what you're talking about, because our campaign has nothing to do about nationalism.
Yes, you absolutely supported Trump, and you know it. And it's all over the internet, so don't deny it.
Our campaign supports Donald Trump's re-election as it helps our campaign gain independence as an independent country. Has nothing to do with racism, has nothing to do with nationalism, has exactly everything to do with the fact that when Trump is re-elected, the people of California will be motivated to vote for independence, and that is why we, in that light, support him.
Trump has everything to do with racism. Trump and all these nationalist groups, these states' rights groups, the idea of states' rights has always been that the laws of the nation that have been won through the civil rights movement and so forth, that fight against discrimination against other people in California, the Mexicans and the blacks, should not be, and that the white people in those states should have the right to decide what should happen. These are not.
I think that there's some significant misunderstanding of our campaign. As if you look into the internet, you'll also find out that our campaign fully supports the 100% return of all, as we mentioned before, the reservations on which the Native population live. Our campaign fully supports the 100% return of those lands to the Native people to fully govern themselves in California. You must be mistaking our campaign.
This is really bogus. Your campaign.
This campaign has nothing to do with racism, nothing to do with the Civil War, and nothing to do with
You make no mention of racism. You make no mention of migrants. How about returning California to Mexico? It's stolen land. Let's really talk about what's going on today. And
well, you can take up that issue with the American people, who are the ones who.
It has no role in this dialogue. Okay, and I really think you should be cut off from it.
California was stolen from Mexico with the people who actually.
If we're going to talk about the people of the world,
the American
it does
government.
not include
American
racism.
Government here is the enemy, not the California Independence Campaign, which is a left liberal group which has supported.
It is not left, and it is not liberal.
Look it up on the internet, you'll find out. I don't think you're from a position of knowledge here. You're making a knee-jerk reaction based on things I've said about Donald Trump, but you should actually look up the information. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have looked it up. Others here.
You don't even make a distinction, I don't anyway, between Donald Trump and Barack Hussein Obama. It's the American empire. And there is no real departure in the statement that this man just made. And I disagree with it vehemently, the whole notion of some kind of independent California entity state. But the thing is that all of America rests upon a foundation of colonialism, domination, stolen labor, etc. So there's no way in hell that someone can unite with this notion that California should now go to whomever this guy represents. I mean, half of Mexico was taken at gunpoint. And this, takes us to the whole point that America is not even some kind of nation of immigrants, it's a prison of nations. And when you look at who's catching all the hell in this country, is all the colonized people in this country. Mexicans from whom this man and his group want to continue alienating from their own land, their own resources, which, by the way, contributes to the poverty and oppression of people in what is called Mexico as well. There's no mention of the African people who are there. What happens to us when you just have another face of white power? This is what you're looking for. We reject that totally. And the problem, of course,
I'd like to point out that there are more than one person from our group, and so he's not covering everything.
The number of people in your group. I'm talking about the politics, the position from your group that's being represented by what.
I believe there's a lot of misinformation going on right now because our campaign is not a racist campaign. Our campaign does not have anything to do with nationalism. Our campaign is about a referendum. And we will collect signatures.
Your campaign is about legally stealing the land of the Mexican people, just like this land was stolen from the indigenous people, and the empire was built on top of it, on their resources, etc.
And in which way does a campaign for California to separate from the American imperialists equal stealing land from Mexico? It doesn't currently belong to Mexico, and no rational proposal
it does belong to Mexico.
Nor would the people of Mexico want it back. Because if we look into the information, Baja Mexico is looking to secede from Mexico and join with us. And so we'll be at some point in time to join with Baja Mexico.
You have a really good speech, and I'm understanding the position. Now we not speak about the separate, the California independent campaign. Yes, I'm supporting the ideas to racist ideas to Trump. I not like him. This is very bad, and I think after the all speakers we speak about this situation who won't. Sorry to my bad English. Михаил, я попросил подключиться вас сейчас к моему диалогу, чтобы перевести.
Да.
Я понимаю, скажите, что зашел спор, наверное, это хорошо, потому что собрались политические организации.
I understand there's a small argument here, which maybe is good because there are political organizations in one place here.
It's a major argument. It's not a small argument.
Это не маленький спор, это как бы большая проблема, аргумент.
This is the dividing line of the movement today.
Это разделяющая линия, которая сейчас встала вот эта тема.
Безусловно, это важный вопрос, и каждая организация имеет право на свою позицию, и, например, антиглобалистское движение России никогда не выступало за расизм и никогда не поддерживало политику Дональда Трампа на территории Соединенных Штатов.
Where we stand on racism and colonial oppression is really the most important point. I really urge the organizers to relook at this.
Важный пункт, на котором я и заостряю внимание. What Mr. Alexander is saying, that of course, without any doubt, it's a major argument, and the anti-globalist movement of Russia has never supported any kind of racism before, and yes, indeed, it is important.
Поэтому я бы попросил бы сейчас перейти к дальнейшим выступлениям, и у нас будет возможность в конце конференции обсудить в прениях доклады участников.
However, at the moment, I would kindly request for the next speakers to carry on, and after all the speeches, we will have time for discussion, and we can discuss this major thing as well. But let us move to the next speaker and have the discussion part after that.
Да, я благодарю и Джо, и Сару за их дискуссию, потому что это важно, и мы должны обсуждать подобные вопросы.
But of course, thank you for this discussion, in the meaning that we have to discuss, we have to be open with each other, what we feel, we have to say it, and this is the way that we move forward together.
Но я бы попросил бы сейчас проявить терпимость и дождаться, когда все выступят, и мы в конце конференции, если будет желание, обсудим это.
Please, I would kindly request, however, at the moment to wait for some time and let the other speakers give their presentation, and we will come back to this topic in the end, by the end of our meeting.
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you,
All
Sarah.
right,
Thank you,
I would
John.
hope
Thank
each
you,
of the
Maurice.
speakers can address racism in global terms and colonialism in global terms.
Speakers should be free to speak as they wish.
Я
not
надеюсь, что
having
каждый
some
спикер
line
выразит против
No free
процесса
speech for racists.
predictated
No free
from
speech for
somebody else.
racists.
Everybody is free to speak as they wish
No.
on topics that are of concern to them, without having someone from New York tell them what everyone else has to talk about.
I don't recognize free speech for racists.
Давайте
Keywords, I don't recognize free speech.
попросите все-таки
I'm not a
сейчас
I'm not a
успокоиться.
racist, that I will not be allowed, I will not tolerate being called a racist. There's no proof or evidence that says I'm a racist. I never said anything racist at all. I simply did not touch upon certain topics that are of interest to her. It doesn't make me a racist.
That's not true. I don't give a damn if you're a racist or not, frankly, because the
Очень
struggle is
смешно.
against colonialism and the domination of white
Friends,
power.
colleagues,
The American government is the biggest
That's the
colonial
issue.
power out
Of course
there.
it is. It is
Yes,
the big.
and if
It
you're
is
not
the biggest
addressing
colonial
racism,
power.
then you're not fighting it.
And I never said anything about racism.
Well, I don't.
California for no reason.
attention, please. Could we please give the word to the next speaker as per Mr. Alexander's request, and we will have time to.
I think I'm due an apology for being called a racist by someone from New York who doesn't know me or our campaign.
Если коллеги не перестанут биться друг с другом, нам придется выключать микрофоны, а я не хотел бы, чтобы наша конференция превращалась бы в такую оголтелую борьбу.
Please,
Okay,
I really
I do
don't
know your
want our
campaign,
meeting
but I
to
will
become
mute. But I
such,
do know your campaign.
and let us not mute each other's microphones and just let the next speaker have a word, and we will definitely come back to this conversation, please.
The next speaker is Jarmut Magdulish, Republica Sinn Féin. Jarmut, switch on your microphone, please. Maybe technical problem. Jarmut, you hear us? Наверное, когда он сделал 7-й, нет, 9-й. The next speaker, the Jarmut, they have something problem, maybe we send that message him now. The next speaker is Hamza Muhammad Hassan from Somaliland. Mr. Hamza, you hear me? Okay, Mr. Hamza, maybe the same problem to Jarmut. Jarmut, you hear us? No, Jarmut not hear us. The problem.
Может быть, нужно включить микрофон им, нет? Или...
Ну, у него включен микрофон, насколько я вижу. Не совсем понятно, почему он не работает. Вообще,
Я предлагаю к следующему перейти спикеру, и потом, если что, он подключится, в переписке будет готов, мы его подключим.
Да, хорошо, хорошо. The next speaker is J.C. Nivelski, the Uhuru movement.
Uhuru, thank you. My name is Jesse Neville. I want to appreciate the organizers of this conference, and I want to salute my leadership, Chairman Omali Yeshitela of the African People's Socialist Party, who spoke earlier. And I want to say unequivocally at the beginning of my statement that this land that I sit on, the land that is referred to as the United States of America, is the land of the indigenous people, including California and all of the other parts of the so-called American Southwest that are comprised of territories stolen at gunpoint from the indigenous people, the Mexican people, that was stolen through the most horrendous terror and genocide and murder carried out by white settlers to secure this stolen land for our benefit, and that land must go back to the indigenous people. And obviously, any movement or organization that is fighting for, on either side of the aisle, really, an organization that is fighting for California to remain part of the so-called union or to secede, that if either organization refuses to say that California itself is an illegitimate colonial settler state, part of the US colonial settler state, that California belongs to, that there is no California. There's occupied Mexico, there's Aslan, there's the land of the indigenous people. And that land must go back to the indigenous people, who are now called illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, for crossing a false, illegitimate colonial border on their own land. When people like myself, people like Louis Marinelli, are the real illegal aliens and colonial settlers occupying stolen Mexican, stolen indigenous land. So I just wanted to start off with that statement and just unite with everything, express my profound unity with the statement made by Chairman Omali Yeshitela, that if we are white people who consider ourselves socialists, who consider ourselves anti-imperialists, who consider ourselves revolutionaries, then we are absolute frauds if we refuse or fail to address the struggle of African people inside this country and around the world for their national liberation. If we refuse or fail to say that we are for reparations to African people, that parasitic capitalism, the system of capitalism that was brought into being through the assault on Africa, the European invasion of Africa, the theft of this land from the indigenous people, the genocide against the indigenous people, and colonialism around the world, that is a system that brought white people out of feudalism into being the population with the highest standard of living on the planet Earth, as Chairman Omali Yeshitela and his theory of African internationalism has proven. And you don't even need to look at statistics to see this, but if you want facts and figures, you can. As Chairman Omali Yeshitela mentioned, in places like Boston, the average white family has 31,000 times the wealth of the average black family. The prison population, including in California, which has a larger prison population than some other countries, has over half of the prison population is African people. Any California secessionist movement or whatever that says nothing about releasing those colonized African people from those colonial dungeons is of no relevance and has no integrity and no principle, and that the land should go back to the indigenous people. So right now we're seeing that under this colonial virus that the chairman has correctly, correctly characterized it, that we refer to as COVID-19, the two realities inside the United States are becoming blatant and stark. We're seeing white people, we have the ability to safely quarantine or work from home, even in places like New York, where African people are dying. African people in New York are twice as likely to die from COVID-19 than white people. Africans in Chicago are 80% of the deaths. In St. Louis are almost 100% of the deaths. So clearly, it's not just about a virus that brings us all together and now we all have to work together and we're in the same boat. This is a virus whose lethal effect is multiplied when combined with the real pre-existing condition that every African, indigenous, Mexican, and colonized person in this country lives with every day, which is that they are colonized, which is that they're under the gun of US colonial oppression that was built for the benefit and enrichment of white society. And colonialism is the issue. It's, as the chairman says, I just want to unite. It's not enough to just talk about racism. What does that mean? Racism is unfavorable attitudes that white people might have towards African people. So if we change our attitudes, if we decide that we approve, we agree that Black Lives Matter, then the whole social system that was built for our benefit will just cease to kill Africans. It will just cease to function. It won't exist anymore. That's not enough. Changing our ideas, unlearning our racism is not enough. The struggle is against colonialism. The struggle is against a social system that was born through the assault on Africa and which today is maintained through state violence against African people and indigenous people around the world. So reparations are owed to African people. And I want to say again, just without any compromise on this question, that a white person who proclaims to be a socialist, who is not for reparations to African people, is an absolute fraud at best. And that includes people like Bernard Sanders and others who will use the mantle of socialism to advance a program that is essentially about protecting and preserving and the lifespan of capitalism. That is essentially a form of using the red flag to disingenuously attack the red, black, and green flag. And real socialist white people have to fight for black power and the death of white power, because genuine socialism will come about when the real working class of the world, which is the African working class, the colonized workers of the world, come to power. And that is the future. That is the real road to socialism. As Chairman Amalia Shatella said, the road to socialism is painted black. So we are calling for all people, all governments, all countries, all organizations who are on the side of genuine self-determination and who are against US imperialism and who want to end a, quote, unipolar world in which US imperialist hegemony reigns supreme over the lives of the peoples on the planet Earth, to stand in solidarity with the African Revolution, to fight for reparations, to unite with the demand coming from the African liberation movement for reparations to African people as a revolutionary demand. And we stand in internationalist solidarity. The Uhuru Solidarity Movement, which is the organization of white people working under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party, we are socialists, we are anti-imperialists, and we stand in internationalist solidarity with oppressed peoples throughout the world. The people of Palestine, that land must go back to the Palestinians. If there was some province of Israel talking about seceding of Israeli settlers, talking about seceding from the Israeli government, I would reject that too, because the entirety of so-called Israel is the land of the Palestinian people and must go back into the hands of the Palestinians. We stand with the people of Korea, we stand with the people of Venezuela, we stand with the people of Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan and all oppressed peoples around the world. And we do that by standing in solidarity with the African Revolution inside US borders and around the world that is fighting inside the belly of the beast to bring this blood-sucking parasitic capitalist social system down from within. And we call on everyone to unite with this struggle, to unite with the African Revolution as the true locomotive force that is leading the world towards genuine international socialism. So we say victory to the African Revolution, death to US imperialism, make Wall Street pay reparations, and this land is not our land. This land is the land of the indigenous people. Victory to the indigenous people in fighting to reclaim their land. Uhuru.
Thank you so much, JC. Михаил, хотел бы еще раз попросить вашу помощь в переводе.
Да.
Я бы все-таки попросил, я понимаю, что сейчас будет бурная дискуссия по поводу того, что сказал господин Луис Маринелли об отмене Конституции в Калифорнии, о мексиканцах и так далее. Я думаю, что все равно выступления каждого из наших коллег должны быть по темам, которые они готовили, а не обсуждение речи господина Маринелли. Я думаю, мы сможем его обсудить после всех выступающих. А у нас их еще осталось порядка 8 человек.
I kindly request all the members of this meeting in their speeches to speak on topics which were pre-planned and which they wanted to share with us. I understand that the speech of Mr. Marinelli, many people want to give their point of view about that and share their opinion, but please kindly let us get back to the speech of Mr. Luis Marinelli, and we can discuss it in the end after more speakers are giving their speech, and we have around 8 more people who are waiting and want to share about them, about the organization, and about today's meeting. Thank you.
И сейчас я хотел бы предоставить слово господину Джармуту Макдугальшу из партии Шимпейн. Джармут, you hear us now? And please check your microphone. Switch on your microphone.
I'm unmuted by host. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, yes.
Happy days. My apologies. I've missed most of the talks. I think the problem was my end. For those that don't know me, my name is Diarmuid MacDougalish. I'm a member of Republican Sinn Féin. Difference between my Sinn Féin and the ones most people will know is that we oppose the British occupation of Ireland, and unlike the other Sinn Féin, they are participating and they are administering this occupation for the British. We're easily a smaller group, but we're out there, we work internationally, we are an anti-imperialist group. On the ground, we work in the occupied 6 counties and in the 26 county states. We have youth, we have separate youth and adult wings. We're also an anti-imperialist group and have over the years highlighted various things that the imperialist nations do. Well, I've spoken at conferences with Alex before in Moscow, and I think it was 3 years ago we were there talking about Catalonia and the absence of democracy, true democracy in Europe. This was highlighted pretty much when the Catalonians had a vote for democracy, a vote for independence, yet the Spanish government and EU sided with the Spanish government and stopped this. It was good to hear the very end of the last speaker. It's the only part I've heard today so far, saying that the lands of, I'm presuming it's the USA, belong to the indigenous people. Outside of this, we have highlighted the absence of democracy again in the Ukraine, where the people wanted to stay with Russia. Yes, the USA and EU are pumping billions of dollars into various different, I can only call them Nazi organizations, opposing this. More than that, I can't say at the moment. I've sat here very quiet and lost most of my train of thought today. I will listen into what everybody else has to say and hopefully add or subtract to what's happening. Is this okay, Alex?
Yes, I have the one problem, and I checked the chat, and I see the very hot message, but I hope they will be right after the conference in the dialogue. Let me know and check the Mr. Hamza from Somaliland. You hear us or not? Okay. The next speaker is Mr. Kinshasa, African Socialist International Movement.
Comrades, all friends, I am Ruiz Kinshasa, the Secretary General for African Socialist International, created and led by Chairman Marinelli. I'm based in London. I'm from Congo originally. I would like to say thanks to the anti-globalization movement of Russia for inviting me in this important conference. I also like to extend to you the warmest and revolutionary greetings, not just from our chairman, Marinelli, but also from the entire leadership of the African Socialist International. We are African internationalists. We have always recognized the importance of uniting all the peoples of the world in the fight to overturn the parasitic system of colonial capitalism that has the world in its death grip. We have always been committed to international solidarity. We refuse to accept the isolation demanded by the African petit bourgeoisie. We have always taken a strategic approach that anti-colonial struggle anywhere in the world is part of our struggle to defeat US imperialism and parasitic capitalism. That's why I would like to offer or reiterate our unconditional solidarity to the governments of President Nicolas Maduro and the peoples of Venezuela. Africa is the birth of humanity. but we are living in subhuman conditions because imperialism is against humanity. In Africa, imperialism was born against African people. In fact, imperialism was born at the expense of Africa. Africa has been under assault since 1415, since the Portuguese invaded Africa, with deadly consequences for Africa and African people everywhere. Our homeland has lost the most important attributes of any nation, the loss of national freedom and national economy. Africans across the world face the consequences of African loss of freedom and national economy. Despite the great struggles and sacrifices of the 1950s and 60s and 70s, it is incorrect to refer to Africa as a free and independent continent. There is no free country or state out there. I'm here not in a free African nation because of the assassination of Malcolm X, Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Dedan Kemafi, and others by US-led white imperialists and their replacement by neo-colonial regimes such as Mobutu, Arap Moi, and so on. And the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi is just another example of the absence of an independent state or country in Africa. People like Nelson Mandela and his struggle against apartheid was a fraud. The struggle was for power and land in the hands of the people, not against the ideas in the head of white people or for white people to like us, but to be in solidarity with Black power, the power of the Black workers. Nkrumah, in his speech at the inauguration of the African Union in 1963, he said this: on this continent, it has not taken us long to discover that the struggle against colonialism does not end with the attainment of national independence. Independence is only the prelude to a new and more involved struggle for the right to conduct our own economic and social affairs, to construct our society according to our aspirations, unhampered by crushing and humiliating neo-colonialist controls and interference. The number of US African military bases, French military bases, and the other imperialist country military presence on the soil of Africa is just one clear manifestation of the domination of Africa by oppressor imperialist nations. Today, we have the coltan and cobalt in the Congo, much needed for the production of high-tech industries. But Congo's population is amongst the 10 poorest countries on this planet. There is oil and gas almost in every African country today. Most Africans do not have electricity in their homes. We are the original victims of globalization. Why are African people working in the United States, Caribbean islands, Canada, and throughout Latin America, working for 100 years? Globalization for us manifests itself as colonialism. We are opposed to colonial globalization, which has always meant theft of our lands, our wealth, and labor by colonizers. Globalization is the colonial dispersal of Africans around the world against our will. There is no equal trade between the colonizers and the colonized. It is parasitism. There is not even a meaningful trade between African countries. Most of the so-called trading is between imperialist countries and the African neo-colonial countries. If you visit England, United States, Brazil, France, and other imperialist countries or centers, you will see that Africans are a community behind prison walls. We live in these countries with no economic or political independence. That is, most of us are workers, and we are not working from homes. For example, in this time of COVID-19, we are in front lines, in hospitals, driving buses exposed disproportionately to COVID-19. It does not matter where we are. We are not working for an African national economy. We are not Black Americans. We are not Black Brits. We are not Senegalese. We are not Malians. They are all false nationalities colonially created nationalities to serve colonialism. All Black people everywhere are African people fighting for the unification of the African nation. Haiti in the Caribbean was known at one time as the Pearl of Antilles. Those pearls did not stay in Haiti, did not go to Africa. They went to France, Europe, and North America. France today is filthy rich, and Haiti is incredibly poor. All our natural and labor wealth went to industrialize Europe and America and other former feudal countries. It was a genocide process that continues up to this very day. African labor and wealth took Europe out of feudalism. This is what Karl Marx refers to as primitive accumulation. Over 1.5 billion of Africans are stateless. African people are not in power anywhere on the planet. Neo-colonial states and power are against African people everywhere. We do not recognize all neo-colonialist states in Africa or in the Caribbean or elsewhere. In order to move humanity forward, Africa must be free and united with its own unified national economy in a new world where there will be no oppressor nations versus oppressed nations as it has been in the 600 years. Since a free and a united African nation can't coexist with parasitic capitalism, a new round of national liberation is necessary. African Socialist International represents a new type of organization to spearhead this new phase of African national liberation struggle. It is worldwide. It is everywhere Africans are located. It has its own revolutionary philosophy, its own strategy and tactics. It is the organization of the most revolutionary sector of the most impoverished social forces in Africa and wherever Black people are located in the world. It's led by Chairman O'Malley Stater. We are calling on anyone who wants to see a new Africa in a new world, free from imperialism and parasitic capitalism, to support the ongoing efforts to build the African Socialist International, the party of African workers around the world. Consolidating the African nation and building the African Socialist International as the tool to achieve that goal must be the top of the agenda of every African on earth, as Chairman O'Malley puts it on the report to the 6th Congress of African People's Socialist Party. White material solidarity towards building the African Socialist International must be the top agenda for every white people from oppressor nations who really want to be in solidarity for African nation. White operation to African nation, independence, African nation, unification, and socialism in our lifetime. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker, Mr. Tobias. You hear us from Germany? Mr. Tobias, are you there? Switch on your microphone, please. Repeat. Not working. I not hear you. There's something technical problem the whole time for this imperialistic program Zoom.
Может, нас не слышно, мы, может, не слышим, потому что
Нет, нас прекрасно слышно. Yes, up, please, up level. And Mr. Beckman, если хотите выступить после, я тогда дам слово. Будете выступать?
Да.
Okay, Tobias, you have the time. Now I'm send attention to Mr. Beckman after you, okay? Thank you. Mr. Beckman, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This is very interesting conference. My name is Johan Beckman. I'm from Finland, and at the moment I'm in Moscow, and I'm also the representative of Donetsk People's Republic in Finland, and I have been doing this for some years now, all the topics and the statements have been very interesting in this debate. I heard that Sarah Flounders, I don't know if she's still with us, but she said that every speaker should take a stance towards two terms, two concepts. The first is racism and the second is colonialism. Now, I would like to point out that there is a political system which is eliminating both problems, meaning both racism and the colonialism. And this political system is called in Russian Ruski Mir. It can be translated as the Russian peace or the Russian world. And this political system is now being used in Russia, of course, and in some countries of the former Soviet Union, and especially in Donbass and in South Ossetia and in Donetsk and Lugansk, etc. This system is I wouldn't call it socialism, although it's very close to socialism. It is a multinational political system, and it is also a multi-confessional political system. And this system clearly exists in a very successful form in Russia. You know that Russia has hundreds of nationalities who live in Russia until today. And but Russia doesn't have any problem of racism. There is no racism in Russia, as racism is understood in the Western countries or in the United States. Why is that? It is because of the political system in Russia, which is called Ruski Mir. It is an ideological system. It is a socialist system. It is an economic system of a specific kind, and it is a very good example of a successful political system. Now I would like to share a couple of words with you about the current situation in the world. Now, I am from Finland, and I would like to emphasize that Finland is a neutral country. Neutral country. So Finland doesn't take, or Finnish citizens don't take any kind of a serious position concerning foreign countries, because we want to be neutral. Now, what is happening in the world at the moment is very interesting, because actually the whole world doesn't know what is going to happen next week or tomorrow or in the next 2 weeks. Everybody is asking at the moment when we are going to get normalized and when everything is going to get back to normal. Now, it is, some experts say that the situation will be normalized in 2024. So we have to live in these conditions several years towards the future. And there is a huge discussion in the world today about what is actually happening in the world, what is the actual problem with the viruses or virus. Maybe there are several viruses, and we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know. And actually anything can happen. So, and this was for everybody, nobody could prepare in this to this situation. Anyway, regarding the political situation in Europe today, The problem with European Union countries is that European Union seems not to exist anymore. I mean, for example, Finland is a member of the European Union, but we don't see any European Union. European Union is not participating in the life of our statehood or politics, by no means, as if it has disappeared or ceased to exist. And the other issue, very important and more important, is the issue with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. Now, is NATO collapsing, or what's happening with NATO? You notice that the only state which is actively helping, assisting, and supporting European states is Russia. I mean, Russia sent 15 airplanes to Italy to help Italy, and Russia sent airplanes to help Serbia. And now, and how many airplanes did NATO send? How many airplanes did European Union send? No airplanes. And the situation, the political situation in several European Union countries is in a huge chaos. And the countries are not able to cope with the situation. So what's going to happen? I think it's a question and matter of our discussion today. So thank you very much for your attention, and it's a very interesting conference. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Йохан. Спасибо
Okay.
большое. Михаил, just a moment, Tobias. Михаил,
Да.
Ты мог бы спросить у Грака Баттлфилда и у Пипа Баротти, хотят ли они выступить, кто-то из них, после Тобиаса?
Так, у меня вот нет списка. Так, кого попросить?
Грек и Пипа.
Мгм.
Хочет ли кто-то из них выступить после Тобиаса?
Так.
Ну, просто спроси Грека и Пипа. Просто.
Are you introducing me?
Mr. Greg?
Yes.
And Miss Pipa. Now, after Mr. Tobias, would you kind to add few words?
Sure.
After Mr. Tobias' speech?
Okay.
Да, вот он говорит да.
Okay, Pipa, you want speech after Mr. Greg? Okay. Okay, go ahead, Mr. Tobias. After we give.
Okay.
Mr.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I think what was not said until now, which is very important, which we should all look at as socialists, as leftists, as anti-imperialists, we're facing now a completely new era. We're seeing now probably the largest recession since 1929, or it's even worse than 1929. I think this is unprecedented. We have never seen anything like that. The stock market crash right now in a scale which is worse than the stock market crash of 1929. We're seeing millions of people getting unemployed. We're seeing unemployment skyrocketing. Like, I think there are now maybe 22 million people in the US who filed for unemployment. I think that's an important task which we all, should pick up as leftists and communists, as people who are struggling, as people who are struggling against empire, as people who are also in the US. We should discuss this topic. I heard that the unemployment numbers are skyrocketing in the UK. If I'm going to the street here, I'm talking to people, just some of my friends. One of my friends told me of 180 people in his company, they fired 80 people. So half of the company was fired because of this coronavirus pandemic, whatever paranoia. I cannot say what is going on, but let's maybe this talk also about this. Currently, some people say like the situation will improve now for the let's say the leftist anti-globalist movements on the global scale. I cannot agree on this. I think that the situation for us is in many ways worsening. There are some possible attempts for us, yes, okay, but in the general, I see that the situation is worsening very much. We see now that there's an accelerated accumulation of wealth by the very super rich. We're talking about the richest people in the world. We're talking about people like Jeff Bezos, who owns Amazon. We're talking about people like Bill Gates, who owns millions, billions of assets. All these people are getting richer. All the big companies are getting richer. They are being rescued by the states, by our countries, our country government, by basically our money, which our governments are presenting these companies. And on the other side, we see basically that people, other people, ordinary people who are employed, ordinary workers getting unemployed, they're getting poorer. We're seeing even middle-class businesses collapsing because they cannot bear the debt anymore. We're seeing a complete eradication of companies. I mean, it's crazy. If you look at this, the only company which is right now operating in the majority of Western countries is, for example, Amazon. And Amazon is the biggest capitalist already out there. Jeff Bezos is the richest person in the world already. So he's making a lot of more billions of money every week, every day. And the ordinary people are getting poorer and poorer. So this is all what this Corona crisis is causing. Like we're talking about, for example, the tourism industry completely collapsing. We're talking about people. I think there are people right now in Spain and Italy who cannot afford to buy food. This is a serious threat. I mean, people will on long terms go and riot in the streets if these if lockdowns are not being loosened again. To be honest, and this will be probably a big discussion, I myself, I don't believe in that there is any major threat by the coronavirus itself. I think that this is another just influenza-like epidemic, like it happens every year. We're right now, the hospitals in Germany are completely empty. They are even sending, they're actually firing people from the hospitals in Germany because the hospitals are so empty. We have basically hospitals which go broke right now because they cannot treat patients. They make no money because they are being hold free for coronavirus patients which never come to us. I think this is all a bigger make-up as is a manufactured epidemic manufactured by the WHO and also Bill Gates, who is behind the main sponsor of the WHO, which he's actually financing 80% of the budget of the WHO. I think a lot of people don't know about these facts. Probably people have not heard about stuff like Operation Dark Winter. Operation Dark Winter was a major operation which was held by the Department of Defense of the US, actually in cooperation with what is today the so-called Johns Hopkins University Center for Public Health. Before it was actually called the Center for Biological Warfare Studies, and this center was actually conducting a war game called Dark Winter to evaluate in around the 2000 years, maybe 2001, to evaluate what would happen to the US if the US is attacked with smallpox virus by Osama bin Laden. This was actually before 9/11. You can Google it. You can check out what the Operation Dark Winter is. You can check out the Department of Defense involvement, and you can check out that these people who are now publishing the data and the statistics on the coronavirus, which is the Johns Hopkins University, that they are the people who have also manufactured this war game. And we're having again seen over the past time on and on again these war games going on by the Johns Hopkins University, and they were actually very profitable for some people. Let's not forget about some years ago, for example, the swine flu. Let's not forget about all the viruses which were allegedly spreading rapidly. This chicken flu and whatever what was going on, they were actually making billions with vaccines. I think people maybe in the US still remember that Rumsfeld with Gilead Sciences made billions with a completely useless vaccine for the swine flu. He was also providing remdesivir, the one of the treatments for coronavirus, which they want to sell now to the US public again. So you can Google this up about remdesivir and Rumsfeld. I think also I need to address that there's something called Event 201, which was happening in the United States before, just before the outbreak of the coronavirus. It was again an event, one of these war games like Operation Dark Winter by the Johns Hopkins University, of course sponsored by Bill Gates and the Bill Gates Foundation and the WHO. You will find the same people who are acting right now in this crisis in this war game called Event 201. You can Google it and check it out. I think there's a bigger involvement of Bill Gates in this whole alleged pandemic which is going on. Bill Gates is also owning the CureVac company, which operates in Germany. It made some kind of headlines some weeks ago when they accused Trump of that he wants to buy an exclusive license of vaccine for the coronavirus from a German company. And it was actually this company called CureVac. The owner of this company is Bill Gates. It's very interesting. Another thing is that Bill Gates stated more than once that we cannot let people out again. Maybe we need to vaccinate at least all of the world population, which would be 7 billion people. And I think that this is a major threat. Why? Because Bill Gates is also invested or is the founder of something called ID 2020. You should all check it up, what ID 2020 is. It's basically an alliance of different companies, which is, of course, Bill Gates, Microsoft, the Bill Gates Foundation, and, for example, Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. If you find out what is about this ID 2020, it's about basically giving everybody in the world a digital identity. So that can sound maybe interesting and okay and good, but if you think about it, actually what it means, it could mean a lot of control over everybody of us by super rich like Bill Gates, who owns this company. So in future, if you're traveling, for example, it could be that you need to provide your digital identity and you will be restricted from traveling. It could be in future, if you want to go to your fitness studio, you will have to provide your digital identity. And if the government locks down on you, your digital identity will be locked. You cannot go to the fitness studio. You cannot travel anymore. You cannot open a bank account. And Bill Gates will have a total control of anybody who is living on this planet. And it's even getting worse. It sounds like a crazy conspiracy theory, but actually Bill Gates even stated that, and that's all public. If you check out the project ID 2020, that Bill Gates wanted to give people a microchip implant, which is now already possible. It's like the size of a rice corn, which you can implant into the skin. And this kind of implant could store all your digital identity data. So I think that's an actual threat. If you believe it or not, you can just Google up the facts. It's very much public. You can read it all out, and you can read Bill Gates statements. You can read what is ID 2020, what is Event 201, and so on. So despite if you believe it or not, we're seeing now, especially all over the world, actually, the rise of dictatorship. So in Germany, we're not allowed to have free speech. We're not allowed to voice our opinion. We are being locked down under, a coronavirus lockdown, let's say it like that. There are a lot of doctors who don't agree that the coronavirus is an actual threat in Germany. And these doctors are being silenced. These doctors are being even put, and there are new laws which made this possible, and this is actually happening. People are being put into psychiatry for opposing the general opinion of our government that the coronavirus is an actual threat. And if you check the data, and there are scientists, there are doctors who said that, for example, in the city of Hamburg, nobody who was counted as a death by coronavirus was an actual death by coronavirus. All these people had pre-existing conditions. They were old, they were dying anyway. And I think when we all see this, what is happening, we need to think about the bigger picture over here. So what did we already see end of last year? We saw a bigger recession coming up, not only to China, but to the whole world. We saw a recession which would cause actually bankruptcy of a lot of companies, which would cause a basic crisis within the Eurozone, like 2009, if somebody still remembers our European Union crisis. I think that this coronavirus is actually a cover-up for this bigger inflation, this bigger recession, which is right now happening in the world. The Chinese economy was already on the verge of a recession. The German economy was on the verge of a recession, and also the US economy was basically on the verge of a recession, which was still, some kind of hindered by the massive amounts of money which Trump was putting into the market, and the lowering of the interest rate by Trump. But right now, I think that with all the money which was put now into the markets, we saw all the central banks printing money like hell. It's crazy. We are printing now so much money, and this will cost us, this whole crisis will cost us trillions of euros and US dollars. And if you think about what will happen is, of course, we will see a massive inflation. Now we're still seeing some kind of deflation. Why? Because people are still trying to get out of their values to go cash, to basically fund their living, to let their companies survive. But if this money will go back, if we'll see the actual inflation on the markets because of the low availability of goods which are now on the market, we will see a massive inflation. And this will be a threat to all people in Europe, in the US, and probably even the whole world, in China, and so on. We will see bank runs like we have seen in Greece, Cyprus, and so on. That's why they want to restrict the availability of cash. And we could even see, I think, a collapse of the Eurozone, which could absolutely create bigger chaos. So again, let's also talk about why Spain and Italy are suffering so much under the coronavirus. I think these are, for example, countries which are right now in the European Union already suffering under a big threat by their high national debt. These countries, if they want to survive within the euro currency and within the euro system and the European Union, they basically need the support of bigger partners in Europe, for example, Germany. So they are trying to create something called Corona bonds. These Corona bonds are actually something, it's like an excuse for making something called Eurobonds. Eurobonds would be that Germany is being accounted for example, the debt of Italy and Spain. We are already somehow accountable for the debt already because of Target 2. It's more complicated to explain. It's economic deep science, but it's very complicated now to explain. However, it would mean that we're having a complete merger with the European Union, so that all the debt is basically guaranteed by the German state right now. That's what Italy and Spain are wanting to accomplish, and else they will be bankrupt, they will have a bigger crisis, and they would have probably to leave the European Union and the Euro system. So now, right now, we are trying to keep the European Union artificially together, and this will cause even more problems for us in the future. I think right now the worst thing about all of this is that we are not allowed to protest against anything what is happening. We are seeing, for example, in Germany, we tried to protest. There were protest attempts in Berlin. They were under lockdown. The police was arresting all the people who were protesting. I think because of this coronavirus epidemic, they will just continue to say that we need to socially distance. We are not allowed to protest. And this can go on for all the time of this actual economic crisis, which is a fact. You cannot deny that there's an economic crisis right now in the world until this economic crisis will be resolved with the one or other way. So yes, you will be unemployed. Yes, maybe you will even suffer and have nothing to eat. No, you're not allowed to protest. That's what they actually want. That's what they're currently accomplishing, and that's a major threat. And people are even supporting this. So there's a big problem with that. So they will probably keep these laws in power and place until all of this is basically the big let's say redistribution of wealth. We're now redistributing all the wealth of poorer people of the states to the super rich and big companies. Until this was accomplished, we will not allowed to be protesting anymore in the streets. So I think that were already some important facts which I got out there. I just want to put into the round, like, how can it be that our African representatives are not saying anything about this? For example, GAVI initiative, which is trying to put vaccines onto the African continent under the leadership of Bill Gates. Why our African comrades are not saying anything about that? There are now more confirmed polio cases by the vaccine in Africa, by this vaccine which Bill Gates is distributing in Africa via the WHO, than actual cases which were there before. So that's something which our African comrades should consider, and we also should consider as whole that there's an unprecedented economic crisis, and we need to find a response for it. We need to prepare for it, how we can fight back against the super rich, which are now taking even more control than ever before, and how we can defend the rights of the workers, which are now being put into the streets, put into unemployment, and which are really suffering. So let us please discuss some of these topics, because I think they are very vital to all the workers and the movement which are united here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tobias. And the next speaker, the Greg Butterfield, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Greg Butterfield. I represent Struggle La Lucha newspaper and the Socialist Unity Party in the United States. I'm very glad to have the opportunity to share our views at this important international forum, and to see so many friends and comrades I've worked with through the important work in solidarity with Donbass over the last several years. I'm happy to report that this past week, on the 6th anniversary of Ukraine's war against Donbass, despite the current restrictions, we were able to organize an online flash mob against the war and blockade of Donetsk and Lugansk. And we had participants from across the US, as well as Germany and Britain, that helped to raise awareness of this important struggle within the left movement in the West. Around the world, working class and oppressed people are fighting a double threat: the global capitalist economic crisis and the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think it's important to state that the two are not exactly the same. The capitalist crisis was already starting, was coming before the pandemic began. The pandemic served as a catalyst and has, accelerated the crisis, but didn't cause it. In the US alone, as others have stated, about 22 million workers have lost their jobs in the past month. And at the same time, the tide of racism, xenophobia, and fascism, and the danger of war is rising dangerously, especially among the small and medium-sized capitalists egged on by Wall Street and Washington. We don't have the luxury of doubting the reality of the pandemic here. The US is at the center of it right now. Over 36,000 people have died here, and a disproportionate number of them are Black, Latin, Asian, and Indigenous, nationally oppressed, colonized people who historically lack access to healthcare and other necessities of life. Migrant workers, prisoners, the homeless and elderly, and others who lack protection under US capitalism are especially vulnerable. But the pandemic and the economic crisis have exposed the hollowness of the US empire to the whole world, and very concretely to workers here who maybe never thought about it that way before. The for-profit healthcare system, decades of destruction of basic social infrastructure allowed the pandemic to run rampant despite the efforts of healthcare workers. And China's measures to control COVID-19 and to give the world time to prepare were sadly wasted on the US government, which is only interested in blaming others for the system's failures. Once again, workers are being forced to bear the burden. Most of those who are deemed essential workers in the US in retail, delivery, transportation, education, healthcare are among the lowest paid and most oppressed. They're the least likely to have access to health insurance or paid sick leave or any savings to fall back on if they get sick. The paltry measures that Donald Trump and the US Congress have taken are aimed primarily at bailing out big business and the banks. Little to no support is being provided to workers risking their lives and health on the front line. And that is why across the US, nurses, grocery workers, Amazon workers, meat processing workers, delivery drivers, many other workers have had to hold protests or even go on strike to demand basic safety measures and personal protective equipment, which has not been provided by their bosses or the government. While working hand in hand with the big capitalists, especially big oil, and sanctioning countries like Iran, Venezuela, and Russia during the crisis, Trump is now encouraging armed right-wing demonstrations by small capitalists and ideological neo-fascists at state capitals, where they're demanding the lifting of health and safety measures and a return to business as usual. While claiming to represent the little people, they're actually doing the bidding of big capital. It's a textbook example of fascist demagogy, and we reject it. Yesterday, healthcare workers in Denver who are on the front lines fighting the pandemic stood in traffic to block one of these fascist demonstrations. The images of nurses in their uniforms and medical masks standing up to these armed gangs reminded me of the images from Donbass 6 years ago, when local residents courageously surrounded the Ukrainian tanks that were rolling into their land. This is an example of the kind of direct action that's needed to push back those who are only too happy to see workers and poor people die. Another front in the struggle has been to hold car rallies and caravans to prisons and migrant detention centers, demanding the release of these captives of the system. It's important, I think, to contrast the difference between the Trump-backed demonstrations and what the progressive pro-people demonstrations have been like. You've seen pictures of the armed groups at the state capitals, not social distancing, not covering their faces with masks, not taking any precautions against infecting themselves or their families or communities. But in the demonstrations that we have been participating in, people practice social distancing, wear masks and gloves and so on, because we are protesting the system, but also taking responsibility for the health and well-being of our class and our communities. My group is working with others throughout the US to build a People's Defense Network to assist workers who are fighting for their rights on the job, for unemployment, insurance, to push back the right-wing assault. We demand health care and a national income for all during this crisis, a ban on rent and evictions for the duration, and other measures to ensure that workers are protected and that the capitalists pay for the crisis they have created. Next week on May Day, May 1st, International Workers' Day, we will join with other groups in the US raising the demands. Don't die for Wall Street, don't die for Trump, strike, don't die. Trump and government officials at all levels, state, national, local, have proven they're unable to cope with this crisis. The system is unable to cope with the crisis. We know that people can't rely on Trump or Biden, Republicans or Democrats. We have to organize ourselves. We join with people of the world who are resisting capitalism, racism, war, and neo-fascism. The people of Donbass have given us a powerful example of resistance to the rising tide of fascism in the world in the last 6 years. We're ready to join in united action with any who share this goal. Finally, I think I have to say that I've learned over the last several years, respectfully working with comrades and friends in the Russian-speaking world and in Europe, that it can be difficult in different parts of the world to distinguish between genuine anti-imperialist movements and movements for self-determination and fraudulent groups that try to take advantage of the terminology to push a racist colonialist agenda. Given the dangerous growth of fascism and white supremacy here in the US and worldwide, I have to support my colleagues like Omali, Sarah, and Joe in saying that this is a dividing line for our further participation. So I hope the organizers will respectfully take this opportunity to reassess and remove fraudulent forces from these forums so that we can move forward together. Thank you so much to Sasha and the organizers for giving me this opportunity to share our perspective.
Thank you, Greg, for your speech. It was great. And people, you hear us? You ready?
I believe I'm unmuted now. Oh, hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, maybe in some cases, good evening. I don't know where we're all coming from, but it's nice to be together and to share our thoughts from around the world on this issue. I come from a slightly different perspective. I'm an eco-socialist. I have been leader of the Green Party back home in Wales. I'm also a small part of some of the organisation of Extinction Rebellion. So from that already, you will guess that my perspective is slightly different. I am thinking forward a lot. Humanity has a very checkered past, much of which has been raked over already today, so I shan't elaborate any further on that. I am British, which you will have guessed by the accent, the arch colonialists, the Brexiteers, the fading light of Britannia as it plunges metaphorically into the waves of its own making. I think first of all, I want to think about something hopeful, and that is that we have countries in the world who have reached out to help. Countries like Cuba, like Russia, like Germany, who've reached out to help others. And we must talk about this more. It's very easy to talk about the selfish countries, the penny pinching, the stealing of masks, the stealing of equipment that healthcare workers need, the lack of provision, the bargaining and the backroom games going on. But let's think about the really good stuff that's happening too. At the moment, I'm staying in upstate New York, in Albany, and we hear the helicopters go over as coronavirus patients are airlifted from New York City, where the situation is desperate, to here where it is not desperate. Still in the same state, very different. We have issues with overcrowding, humanity knows that, and a virus for which there is no cure, which is deadly, rather exacerbates the situation we find ourselves in. Overcrowding is an issue for humans. The urban centres are going to find increasing difficulty in terms of survival, not just in cases of virus, but also in cases of climatic calamity and food supply chains. So we have to think a little bit about humanity structures itself in the cities and the Netherlands around it. Never before has so many humans lived more than one day's walk from their food supply. I think we're noticing that now, in albeit a very small way, but I think we also should be interested in this because, you know, when the food doesn't get through, hunger is a very impatient thing. When the food doesn't get through, people have to take to the streets, virus or no virus. And these are the things that need our attention, whether it will be caused ultimately by the virus or the upcoming synchronous harvest failures, which we can expect. We would do well to be prepared. We would do well to note the countries who reach out and help others, and at the same time try to remedy what is going on in those most selfish countries who pull everything to themselves at the expense of others. They are killing people. The system is killing people. Of course, many of these coronavirus victims are dying from the system. It is weak. It is not prepared. It runs this just-in-time point of view, which is now sadly just too late, already in America for 41,000 people. The system is too weak. It is propped up by hubris and a media which tells no truth. The media is very stingy with what it wants us to know. And we have to fight against that as much as anything else, because the chief organs of communication are not what we are doing now. They are still the TV. They are still mainstream media and a very, very small and decreasing pool of news gathering organizations. I think back in the 70s, we had something like 80 news gathering organizations. Today we have 6. We've had some talk about recession, and there are different ways of framing that. In terms of GDP, which is a failed measure, well, possibly we are. I mean, what supports GDP? War, prison populations. There's nothing particularly great about measuring an economy to something like gross domestic product. Some countries are now experimenting with other measures of national achievement, happiness indexes, for example. And we can look to places like New Zealand, where we have a good socialist prime minister and a government who is working very well for its own people, and which is quite a beacon for the rest of us. Some people call this recession a protective contraction. And that can work in lots of ways. Protectionism is not something we're terribly fond of, but it is, in a sense, a protective contraction. It is not brought about by, unfortunately, sensible government policy. It's brought about by an emergency. And this emergency is causing people to rethink. We already know that we have been extracting from the planet, without any thanks, everything that we need and much that we don't need. There's probably enough stuff kicking around the planet to last 1,000 years without making one other single new item. So let us think about very carefully where we are in the overall planetary aspects of this crisis. Perhaps people are learning that they don't need all this. Perhaps they're learning they don't need to travel. Some will be learning they can work very efficiently from home. We are in a pivotal position where we could construct the future in a different way from the failed past. And that would be more meetings like this, where people learn each other's problems and learn to support each other and walk forward to the future, trying to solve the problems we see upcoming together between us in a mutually beneficial way. Hope does start with helping each other. We're seeing it around the world, and we have to absolutely crush out those selfish people and those selfish organizations and the selfishness at the top of so many countries, because it's not the people who are selfish. The people don't know any different. I think that with time to reflect, we will be seeing some changes. At the moment, you know, really we're altruists ruled by psychopaths in many, many countries. How did we let that happen? How can we learn the lesson and not let it continue? And how can we prevent it happening again? So I want to really just end by saying, think to the future. Do not forget your ecology and the land on which your health and your actual existence ultimately depends. Start putting it forward, because we were not prepared for this coronavirus. We are certainly not prepared for climate change. Thank you to everyone, and particularly the organisers, for putting this together.
Thank you so much, Pippa. So, sorry, the Mr. Hamza from Somaliland, you hear us?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Speech.
Yeah. Could you hear me?
Yes. Yes. Switch on your microphone, please.
Hello, everybody.
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Hamza from Somaliland, the Republic of Somaliland. So, first of all, I would like to thank the Donetsk People's Republic. I would like to send my special thanks to the peoples of Donetsk Republic for this meeting, the online meeting. Secondly, I will also send my condolences to those who died for freedom in Donetsk Republic and also other areas in the world. Firstly, I would like to introduce you some introduction about Somaliland. The Republic of Somaliland is located in the Horn of Africa. It has a border with Ethiopia, Somalia, Djibouti. It was Somaliland historically. It was a separated political entity with Somalia, and it was during the colonial era, and post-independence period, it is unlawful merger with Somalia. It is a continuous phase. It reclaimed its independence since 1991. Somaliland liberated its territory and reinstated its sovereignty. It has established its own government, parliament, judicial system, thereby fulfilling all requirements of state according to Montevideo Convention, which include permanent population, territorial defined international colonial boundaries, a stable government which accepts its authority over its territory, the capacity to enter relations with sovereign states and international organizations. Somaliland has a permanent population about 5 million people. Its border was established during the colonial era, such as the Anglo-French Treaty in 1888, the Anglo-Italian Treaty in 1894, the Anglo-Ethiopian Treaty in 1897. So Somaliland is that. it has its own force, its own flag, anthem, currency, central bank, passport, and all of this. So I would like to highlight some remarks about the African Union fact-finding mission in 2005. Somaliland received AU fact-finding mission in April 2005, which visited and stayed Somaliland from April 30 April to 4th March, May 2005. The main mission, the aim of the mission was to understand and monitor the prevailing situation, political and economic and social issue. After finalizing that mission, the statement of the African Union was as follows: going by the clear presentation and articulate the mandates of the authority and the people of Somaliland concerning their political, social, and economic history. Somaliland has made a preferred region by default. The Union established in 1960 brought enormous injustice suffering to the people of the region. In fact, that union between Somaliland and Somalia has never been ratified, and also malfunction when it comes from 1960 to 1990 makes Somaliland search for recognition, historically unique and self-justified in African political history. Objectively view, the case should not be linked to the notion of Panadera box, as they suggest that the AU should find a method of dealing with this outstanding case. So this is the Somaliland overall view. I would like to add some remarks about the current situation about the world. I hope after the coronavirus, the world situation will be the same. I think the globalization theory is is connected with an ICU ventilator. So we are witnessing that this time he's it is in a situation of brain death. So I would like to remark that all those who support dialogue of nations will support each other in terms of medical assistance for this current situation that most of the countries face challenges either in their home or abroad. So I would like to remark that those countries which we would like to endorse the countries to help each other in terms of medical assistance or training local health medical staff. I would like to also that's all my thank you very much for your assistance, and thanks for Alexander, and thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Artem Buzivo from Odessa. We speak in the Russian, and Mr. Mikhail translate him. This is a short speech, and we cancel this conference. Go ahead. Артем, пожалуйста, Михаил вам поможет, только попрошу вас кратко, чтобы с переводом было, и мы будем уже завершаться. Благодарю вас.
Да, большое спасибо. Добрый вечер. Было очень интересно слушать ваше выступление.
Good evening, and thank you very much. It was very interesting to listen to the speeches today.
Да, на самом деле меня немного неправильно представили. На самом деле я родом из Одессы, но на данный момент живу в Луганске, который сегодня является столицей Луганской Народной Республики.
Yes, actually, I want to say a few words about my introduction. I'm originally from Odessa city, but at the moment I'm in Lugansk, which is the capital of Lugansk People's Republic.
Ну, наверняка многие из вас не в курсе моей биографии. Я вынужден был эмигрировать в Луганск после того, как в Одессе в 2015 году, 5 лет назад, я был арестован Службой безопасности Украины по подозрению в покушении на территориальную целостность Украины за то, что я был одним из журналистов, который поддерживал одесский антимайдан.
In short, I had to move from Odessa. I had to migrate from Odessa after the events of 5 years ago because I was arrested and I was accused being a journalist who was supporting the Odessa anti-Maidan, and I was arrested by the authorities of Ukraine, and I had to run from there to save my own life.
Вы знаете, через буквально 12 дней будет трагический юбилей, не юбилей, а годовщина, 6 лет со дня сожжения одесситов. Наверняка вы слышали об этой истории. В Одессе 2 мая было сожжено более 50 людей, участников Одесского антимайдана.
And after 12 days, as you know, there will be a tragic anniversary of the Odessa events, which was back on 2nd of May of 2015, when more than 50 people were burned alive in Odessa during these events.
И мне бы несколько хотелось бы примирить стороны, которые сегодня выступали, были там определенные политические обвинения. Так вот, я хотел бы сказать, что в Одесском доме профсоюзов были сожжены люди абсолютно разных взглядов, от правых до левых, но это были люди, которые не воспринимали то, что им запрещали говорить то, что они думают, и запрещали высказывать те мысли, которых они придерживались. Поэтому я бы вот в плане Одессы бы заявил о том, что все-таки, несмотря на разные мнения, все-таки важно очень поддерживать диалог, и никогда нельзя никому закрывать рот, иначе заканчивается геноцидом людей.
And here I would like to give my remark regarding the previous discussion after Mr. Marinelli's speech, and I want to give the example of the tragical events of Odessa, where 50 people were burned in the House of Unions, and they were members of different organizations, starting from right to left. And I want to I want to request to have peace here today, because we all have the right for our sharing of our opinion, and we all are from different organizations. We have our points of view, but main that we are united here to fight the genocide. We have the common idea, we support the same ideology, no matter what particular point of view we are having. So let's make it a peace.
И чтобы долго не задерживать ваше внимание, я хотел бы подчеркнуть, что уже от лица Луганска, что и в Луганске люди выступали все-таки одновременно и за социальные, безусловно, экономические требования, несправедливости экономической системы, которая сложилась на тот момент в Украине, так и за их собственные национальные права. Имеется в виду права русского населения Украины. И здесь вопрос абсолютно не в национализме, вопрос абсолютно не в угнетении одной нации на другой. Вопрос в том, что русской национальной группе не позволяли говорить о том, не позволяли открывать собственные школы, не позволяли говорить то, что и социальные, и экономические требования одновременно были представлены в тех событиях 2014 года, которых вы имели возможность лицезреть.
And I want to emphasize your attention on the events of 2014, which took place in Donbass, and say that that was, of course, the demands of the better social conditions, the economical situation of this land. But not only that, it was also the demands for the right of self-recognition, because actually the very vast group of Russian population, people who consider themselves to belong to the Russian world, were not allowed to speak their own language, were not allowed to communicate in their own language, to have their own culture and show it openly. And that was also one of the demands, apart from the social and economic demands, which people fought for back in 2014.
Спасибо большое. Выключился микрофон.
Артем.
Да, я думаю, Артем выступил, насколько я понимаю.
Да, я извиняюсь, звук выключился. Спасибо большое за возможность выступить. Будем очень рады еще раз встретиться в таком коллективе, может быть, с новыми участниками.
Thank you for opportunity to speak here, and we'll be glad to meet online, offline with you, with more people, and meet in future.
Михаил, я бы попросил сейчас помочь мне с переводом тогда. Еще раз. Я благодарю всех коллег, которые сегодня собрались здесь. Я очень благодарю движение Донецкая Республика.
I want to say thank you to all the colleagues who were present today. Huge thank you to the public movement Donetsk Republic for making this possible.
Все мы находимся сегодня на краю борьбы.
We are all here on the edge of our fight.
И самой страшной для нас угрозой являются представители империализма.
And the biggest threat are the representatives of the imperialism.
Именно и империалисты создали колониальную систему.
It was imperialists who created the colonial system.
И мы знаем это по книгам о Марии Шетел.
We know it, including we know about that also from the books, from the book of
о Марии. Именно империалисты создали террористические организации.
It was imperialists who created colonial organizations.
И террористические организации сегодня пришли на Ближний Восток и в Азию.
Imperialistic organizations who are now in the Middle East and in Asia, and they have their presence there.
И они борются с людьми, которые отстаивают интересы равенства наций и самоопределения.
And they're fighting against the people who support the right for self-recognition and equality.
И мы сегодня также подвергаемся информационному гонению и попыткам физической ликвидации.
And today we are at the informational war and also are under the threat of physical destruction.
Но пока мы будем понимать, что в Африке, в Латинской Америке гибнет десятки тысяч людей от голода и от недостатка чистой воды, от недостатка социальных благ и так далее, и это гораздо больше, чем коронавирус, мы не можем успокоиться.
But while we understand that in African countries, in Latin America, more people die because of lack of pure drinking water due to the hunger than it is actually due to coronavirus. Until then, we cannot stop.
Мы должны бороться с фашистскими организациями, потому что фашистские организации, которые говорят о превосходстве одной нации над другой, это тоже следствие работы империалистических структур.
And we must fight the fascist organizations who speak about the supremacy of one nation over another. And until such organization exists, we must fight them. It is all a part of bigger imperialist organizations as well.
И сегодня этот вирус, как правильно говорят наши коллеги из движения Ухуру, это не коронавирус, это colonial virus.
And this coronavirus today is our friends from Uhuru movement are saying and call it colonial virus. It is colonial virus indeed.
И мы должны в первую очередь бороться с теми организациями и правительствами, которые его распространяют, говоря о том, что могут вмешиваться в дела суверенных государств, так как это произошло в Сирии, Иране, Украине и других странах.
And we must find the governments and the government organizations who are saying they have right to interfere in the fate of other countries, how we can see it happening in Ukraine, Syria, Iran, and we must fight such attitude.
Мы должны бороться за репарации, которые должны государства выплачивать странам, которые находились под колониальным гнетом достаточно долгое время.
And we must fight to get the countries which were under the colonial power before, that such countries must get and should get repatriations, and we must fight until this happens.
Мы должны говорить о том, что каждый человек индивидуален, и его права и законные интересы должны соблюдаться во всех странах.
We must speak that every person, every human being is unique, and his or her rights and human rights must be followed in every country, no matter where in the world.
Поэтому мы должны бороться за то, чтобы те мигранты, которые, где бы они ни находились, или в Соединенных Штатах, или в России, могли чувствовать себя наравне с местным населением.
So we must fight for the rights of the migrants, no matter where it is in Russia or the US, for their rights to be there and be having those rights and be equal to the citizens of that country.
Как только кто-то пытается вбить клин между национальными отношениями и религиозными, получается война.
It is that moment when someone tries to create that separation between religions or between nations. That's how the war starts.
Вот моя билетка из Сирии. В ней я воевал с террористами, которые на тот момент захватили большую часть страны.
This is my hat from Syria, which I was wearing while I was fighting against terrorists. At that time, they conquered almost all the territory of Syria, and that time I was there fighting with
И знаете, кого я видел там, кроме террористов, на севере страны?
And you know whom I saw there and whom I met there in the north of the country, apart from terrorists?
Я видел там американских солдат,
I saw American soldiers there
которые были вместе с террористами.
who were together united with these terrorists.
И когда 700 миллиардов военного бюджета с Америки выделяется на то, чтобы воевать рядом с террористами, то это бюджет не против борьбы с терроризмом, а бюджет против борьбы со всеми свободными людьми в мире.
And when $700 billion is given to fight against the terrorists, it's actually the money, the budget, not to fight against terrorists, but to fight against countries who want to fight for their own freedom.
Именно и это есть проявление высшего империализма.
And this is the fact, and this is the proof of the highest method of imperialism.
Я благодарю вас, и на этом официальная часть нашей конференции закончена. Кто хочет, может остаться и продолжить обсуждение. Как таковых дальнейших выступлений у нас уже не предусмотрено, поэтому мы можем перейти к обычному диалогу.
Thank you again, and now the official part of our conference is over, and those who are willing, we can continue discussing and have a dialogue on the topics which are important and which we can discuss now.
Уважаемые коллеги, перед тем, как отключиться, хотелось бы всех поблагодарить за такой живой и интересный диалог. У нас предложение, вот у нас такой девиз: критикуешь, предлагай, предлагаешь, бери ответственность, делай. Вот провести следующую видеоконференцию вот формате именно предложений. То есть сегодня было высказано очень много критики и минусов существующей глобальной системы управления. Какие конкретные предложения вы видите и в области экономики, и финансов, и социальных проектов? Вот хотелось бы этой теме посвятить нашу следующую встречу. 1 мая будет праздноваться Международный день трудящихся. Вот предлагаю 1 мая встретиться и поговорить на эту тему. И со своей стороны мы постараемся, чтобы в нашей встрече принял участие и глава нашей республики Денис Иванович Пушилин.
Dear friends, on behalf of the Donetsk People's Republic, I want to say thank you again for all who are here today. And we say, if you want to give any critiques or criticize something, suggest some alternative to that. If you suggest that alternative, take responsibility for that suggestion and do it. So today it was a great introduction and great meeting you.